ahead and get started. Tonight we are talking about divine design. Only a rookie who knows nothing about science would say science takes away from faith. If you really study science, it will bring you closer to God. That's by a nanoscientist named James Tour. If you're Marvel fans, we're going to have a lot of Marvel tonight. Nanoscience. To kind of sum some things up, the book does talk a lot about the Big Bang. It does talk a lot about divine design. Keep in mind that science is proving that the Big Bang happened. It doesn't mean we believe in the Big Bang. We as Christians believe that God did it, right? But what they're saying in the Big Bang is that they're saying that everything came into existence at once, okay? And so they, as in worldly people, consider that as called the Big Bang. We consider that as God, right? Not we consider it, we know it was God, right? I should change my talk. But anyway, keep that in mind. Same thing with intelligent design or divine design. A lot of people, mainly Christians, will hear that terminology. They'll hear one person speak something that they don't agree with, and they'll say, everything about divine design is wrong, or everything about intelligent design is wrong. That's not necessarily the case. Someone who we know is God intelligently did design us, okay? Did design everything. So just keep in mind like a 50,000-foot view, not necessarily the details. There's obviously problems with some of these theories, but they're trying to put a non-God spin on it because they don't believe in God. We're trying to prove that it is God. Everything science does exactly prove that God does exist.
And so God may have said bang.
He may have. He didn't speak it, right? He said, watch this. Richard Dodger did this last week. I really enjoyed it. So I thought maybe we should keep it up, doing a recap of what we've learned so far. So truth can be known. Remember that. That's a huge thing that we're dealing with in our culture today, is that truth can't be known. So truth can be known. Remember the law of non-contradiction and the either-or principle. It's either this or that. Cannot be both, no matter what logic you use, no matter where you live in the world. It's either this or that, and it can't contradict itself, right? There's no such thing. It's either complementive or it contradicts. All right, my favorite thing these guys say is this line right here. Science doesn't say anything, scientists say things. So even though the scientist is doing the studying, remember Einstein, he said, hey, I know for a fact that I don't want to believe everything that my math is telling me, so I'm going to include a fudge factor, right? Scientist said something. Even he didn't want to listen to the science. And then the other one is what we're told versus truth. This is a huge one today. What you're told versus what is actual truth. So real quick, we hope this class is helping you gain confidence that science proves God's existence and not the other way around. The universe has a beginning and is not eternal. Since the universe has a beginning, something had to cause that beginning. Science proves it all happened at one time, thus calling it the Big Bang. Space, time, and matter all started at the exact same time in a large push, or surge, the book calls it. Atheists call this the Big Bang, we call it God. Okay? So divine design. The astronomical evidence of God must be strong when an atheist physicist admit that the universe exploded out of nothingness. I want you to listen to that again. An atheistic physicist admit that the universe exploded out of nothingness, and an agnostic astronomers claim that supernatural forces were so at work in the beginning that scientists are led back to theologians. Have y'all ever heard that a scientist, as they're working on something, will go back to the Bible to get an answer? Better yet, have you heard of an archaeologist who cannot figure out what is going on and will go back to the Bible? Is Scott Hankins in here? There's a show on Netflix, I don't remember what it is, but it talks about the Egyptians and archaeology versus what the Bible says. Have you seen it? So according to the Egyptians, there's this giant gap, because they want to believe that that Egypt is years and years earlier than what the Bible says, their empire. And so there's these big in a timeline, there's these giant gaps of just blackness that they don't have any information about. But if you follow what the Bible says, when it says 482 years later this happened, it shrinks those black lines down to about like that. So it's pretty amazing that they just would listen to the Bible, just follow the Bible and believe it. it can clear up a bunch of things in archaeology and science. So keep that in mind also. All these guys are running back, and they're going, hey, what does the Bible say about this? Because they don't know. Every design had a designer. I went back and forth on this about 4 or 5 times. Is it every design has a designer or every design had a designer? What do y'all think? I agree.
Has.
Has?
It should be has.
Has? Yeah.
The design still exists.
The design does, but the designer had to design it before it happened. So every design had a designer. Now, now the universe has, listen, the universe has highly complex design. So yes, it has highly complex design, but every design had a designer. Agree to disagree? So let's simplify it. Every watch requires a watchmaker, right? We don't have a problem with this with anything inside this world, do we? Like no one stumbles across a laptop and the beach digs it up and goes, ooh, look what just magically appeared. And then where's the power cord, right? How did that magically appear, right? No one does that. I mean, no one looks at a Rolex watch and says, wow, these diamonds just set themselves in here. Or if you're me, a G-Shock watch or an Apple watch, right? Everyone knows that anything made on this earth was created by us, most likely, as far as mechanical, right? The universe is more precisely designed than a watch by far. By far. And we're going to talk about the principles and the things that kind of go into that. So let's get into it. Divine design, anthropic principle. Anybody know what this means? No, you cheater. All right, speak up.
The principle is that everything is so finely tuned. If it was a degree off in one direction or another, life wouldn't be possible.
That's right. That's absolutely right. So it's basically a fancy title for evidence that has many scientists believing that the universe is extremely fine-tuned. And I don't mean somewhat fine-tuned. I mean extremely fine-tuned. Mathematically, it is a lot of zeros, right? They get you to the point. And we'll kind of go through these step by step. Inside this principle, there's these anthropic constants, and we're going to cover 5 of them through detail, and then we'll just kind of I'll read another 10 of them. But these are the things that God has pretty much set in motion that no scientist can even refute, right? They know it's there. They don't know how it could have been set to such precision, but they know that somebody had to cause that because the chance, for it to be chance, it would be like 1 in a million, right? 1 in a billion, trillion, whatever you want to call it, okay? Who's familiar with the mission of the Apollo 13? I'm sure everybody is, right? What happened? Do we know what happened on Apollo 13?
Something that was designed years before the mission failed.
Okay. Anybody else? Other than Tom Hanks and Bill Paxton? I can't remember the third one. And I know there was Gary Sinise, but he wasn't in the capsule. What was the third one? Footloose himself. Anybody remember specifically what might have happened there on that mission? Houston, we have a problem.
They were mixing the oxygen tanks, which was a routine procedure, and there was an electrical failure that caused one of the tanks to explode.
It wasn't an electrical failure, but it was a failure, right? And they were venting oxygen out into the atmosphere, right? So in the book, this kind of goes parallel with Apollo 13 mission, and it kind of explains kind of the problems they went through and what we have here on Earth. That's a lot to kind of undertake, so we're just going to hit these more just straight line. But it was an oxygen bottle that blew up. You are correct, right? And I read this like 3 or 4 times because I thought it was an electrical short also. But according to the book here, someone accidentally dropped the oxygen tank 2 inches from the ground. And that 2-inch drop damaged the integrity enough to cause all the problems that happened in Apollo 13. But This is a human, right? We make errors. Imagine God doesn't make errors, right? But remember, just 2 inches caused all of that problem. Something that we know dear and dear in our heart about Apollo 13. 2 inches caused all of that. All right, so let's get into the anthropic constants. Constant number 1. The Earth's atmosphere is made up of 21% oxygen. Precisely 21%. If we had 25%, fires would just spontaneously combust and burn uncontrollably. If we had 15% oxygen, humans would suffocate. 21% is the magic number. I have no idea why. There's a lot more into it than that. In the atmosphere, right? Anybody know more about that, though? Andrew, anything?
Pretty reason, but I'll go down rabbit holes with that.
So 21% oxygen, right? Like I said, 25, 15, it affects everything. It can't even sustain life. So that's the number 1 constant, right? Number 2 constant is atmospheric transparency. This is the rabbit hole he's going to go on. You have to think about this for a minute because it's a little backwards. If we had less transparency, meaning we couldn't see into space, right? That not enough solar radiation would reach the Earth's surface. Solar radiation is extremely important. Does anyone know where the longest lifespan in the world is as far as to live at? Greece. Why is that? It's actually Denver, Colorado. They're a mile high, right? And they get more solar radiation than anywhere else. It's not the weed. Solar radiation. Okay? What was it Craig Dodgen said? I never thought there'd be something that would overtake how many chicken shops, how many chicken restaurants are on Expressway until CBD got here and took it over. So if it was cloudier, then we'd have less solar radiation coming through, and that would affect not only everything on the Earth, like photosynthesis and stuff, but it would affect us also. We get vitamin D from that. COVID was a big deal. When we had COVID, people weren't going outside, people weren't getting vitamin D that actually was affecting them, right? Vitamin D is a huge part of our system. If it's more transparency, meaning it's not cloudy enough, not cloudy, but you know what I'm saying, if it's too transparent, then too much solar radiation will bombard us. If we get too much solar radiation, then we will die from the radiation. Anybody have granite countertops at their house? So granite gives off radiation. Did y'all know that?
It gives what?
Gives off radiation.
Oh.
Anybody have Fiesta ware? I know you do. Fiesta,
She goes.
Fiesta ware gives off radiation. Well, certain colors, I don't know. All of Fiesta colors do. Orange particularly gives off a lot of radiation. They have to use radioactive isotopes to get a color to bake on there, right? But granite definitely gives off radiation. The reason we installed granite in our house was to give me more radiation. I worked with radiation for 13 years, and I have about 12 REM is what my dosage is at right now. 25 is all you can have in a lifetime. So my age bracket based off of studies done in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, 50 years of studies, my lifespan is going to be 62 to 65. But if I can install granite countertops, I can kick me up to 15 REM and live to 83. Playing a little God, right?
Please tell me they have a
We do have granite countertops. So in addition to the atmospheric transparency, the atmospheric compensation or composition is a precise levels of nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and ozone, and all of those are also constants, right? So we have a specific amount in there. Now we're going to get into us raising CO2 levels, right? Because that's a big thing right now, right? All right, so number 3, the Moon-Earth gravitational interaction. What does the Moon and Earth's interaction do for us?
Controls the tides.
Tides, controls the tides, right? Greater interaction would cause what?
Flood.
More flooding, right? Less interaction would cause what? It actually would even cause the sun not to stand still, where it does. Our moon's gravity is enough, even the perfect placement of the planets is all there set, even our moon, to make sure that everything stays in its order in our solar system, right where it's supposed to be gravitationally. So even if our moon had less interaction, it would cause the sun just to keep on going. Faster or slower than us, I don't know, but it would keep it on going. But either way, it would make life on Earth impossible. All right, and then the fourth constant is carbon dioxide level. I'm sure you guys hear a lot about this, right? Greenhouse gas effects, it's huge in the oil and gas industry right now. It's huge everywhere. Anybody want to take this line on? Higher CO2 levels, then the greenhouse gas effects would develop, which is what we're talking about, right? If we have too high CO2 levels, then these greenhouse gas effects would happen and we would all cook. We would all just burn up. Everything would go on. Lower CO2 levels, and plants would not be able to maintain the efficient photosynthesis. Now, you're not all scientists here that I know of, right? So, what do plants breathe? CO2. What do humans breathe? What do plants give off? What do humans give off? You hear a balance in that? Pretty good balance, right? But then we start driving these cars, and they start burning petroleum or gas, and then they start causing CO2 levels to raise, supposedly, right? And then we have a percent up. But if CO2 levels rise, what's going to happen? Something that is very logical that no one talks about. No? More plants, right? You remember the Michael Jordan, Mia Hamm, anything you can do, I can do better. It's like God sitting up there going, go ahead, watch this. I've read this, I've heard this. What I could find was different than what I read, so I'm going to go with what I found, which is research from 1982 to 2020. We know that the CO2 levels in the atmosphere rose about 17%, but what they don't tell you is that plant growth has risen 12%. I've heard up to 23%. The Earth is actually greener today than it was because of CO2 levels. So there's a balance going on. All I can say to this is anything we can do, God can counter. We cannot control this world. He built it, He's in control. But nevertheless, there's a finite amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and for every time we think it goes up, there's more plants. Well, if there's more plants, then it's replacing the oxygen level also, right? Right back to 21%. But you don't hear that. No one talks about that. All we discuss is that, CO2 levels are going up. Okay?
Hey, before you go on, I think it's important, the parallel with Apollo 13, especially on this one. So the explosion, and it damaged the oxygen tank, and they're losing all their oxygen, and we know that. This is in the movie. What's not accounted for, perhaps in this scenario, is the fact that CO2 levels are going to rise because now we've got 3 guys in the whatever part of the spacecraft instead of just 2 that they were counting on. And you remember in the movie they had to make filters, and Ed Harris says, obviously this is a government operation because in one part of the spacecraft the filter was round and the other was square, and they had to finagle a way to come up with that. It really illustrates this principle about oxygen, 21%, CO2. What was going to happen if the CO2 level continued to rise and not enough oxygen? Those guys would have suffocated, which, same thing here. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's right. It's real hard to intertwine it. You should read it in the book because it's great, but it's real hard as in a class to intertwine all that.
Let me jump in real quick too.
Go for it.
To piggyback off of what Dalen's saying, there's a balance, and it's really easy to see if you are willing to see it. How many people have lived here for several years in the same area? What happens with the weather? Fluctuates. Every couple of years it'll be really wet. A couple of years it'll be really dry. A couple of years it'll be really hot. A couple of years it'll be pretty mild. It goes up and down. There's a balance. Part of the problem, this is where we get possibly going down some rabbit holes. I'm not trying to make a political statement or anything like that, but one thing that I've recently learned about, man loves to play God, right? Some organization, this is scientific papers, you can look all this up, this isn't some conspiracy someone came up with. There's a lot of ideas about airplane vapors. You see the airplanes flying through the sky and you see the vapor trails, right? Some of them, they'll say, those are vapor trails left. Okay, some of them are. Some of them stay in the sky for hours afterward. Any idea what that is?
The government's poisoning us.
Right. There are all these conspiracies about the government's poisoning us, they're doing, whatever. There are scientific papers. Bill Gates he's on camera talking about it, he's funding it. Scientific papers. What we are trying to do, what man is trying to do, we've discovered some kind of a chemical we can put in the atmosphere that actually removes CO2. It somehow pulls it out, encapsulates it so it can't do whatever it does, and gets rid of it. Now, if there's a natural balance, what is that going to do? It's going to imbalance it, right? If we reduce CO2, what's that going to do to plant life? Kill them off. What's that going to do to oxygen? What's that going to do to us? So there's a problem here. There's a problem when man steps in thinking we've got all the solutions. God's made it fine-tuned, self-balanced, and we're messing it up. Put aside all the global warming, fossil fuel, blah, blah, whatever. There's a balance, and it's fine-tuned very precisely. We'll get more into that as we go to solve these issues. Good.
All right. So the constant 5 is gravity. How much gravity, you say? If gravitational force was to change by that percent,
Don't say what it is. Say it.
my math wizard, go for it. Yeah. I did count those zeros, make sure I put 32 zeros in there. It's actually 37. 37 zeros before the 1. If gravity was off that much, we wouldn't be here. The sun wouldn't be here, moon wouldn't be here, planets wouldn't be here. That's how much, that's how fine-tuned just gravity is for us, right? Here's some more. If the centrifugal force of planetary movements did not precisely balance the gravitational forces, nothing could be held in orbit around the sun, meaning every planet has a role. Every planet size matters where you put it, right? Inside that system. If the universe had expanded at a rate 1/1,000,000th more slowly than it did, expansion would have stopped and the universe would have collapsed on itself before any stars had formed. If it had expanded faster, then no galaxies would have formed at all. Any of the laws of physics can be described as a function of the velocity of light, which is now defined as a specific number, meters per second, right? It's like 292 million meters per second. Even a slight variation in the speed of light would alter other constants and preclude the possibility of life on Earth. If water vapor levels in the atmosphere were greater than they are now, a runaway greenhouse effect would cause temperatures to rise too high for human life. If they were less, an insufficient greenhouse effect would make the Earth too cold to support human life. If Jupiter were not in its constant orbit, the Earth would be bombarded with space material, or junk, like asteroids, comets, all of the above. Right? Jupiter's gravitational field acts as a cosmic vacuum cleaner, attracting asteroids and comets that might otherwise strike Earth. If the thickness of the Earth's crust were greater, too much oxygen would be transferred to the crust to support life. If it were thinner, volcanic and tectonic activity would make life impossible. If the rotation of the Earth took longer than 24 hours, temperature differences would be too great between night and day. If the rotation period were shorter, atmospheric wind velocities would get too great. The 23-degree axial tilt of the Earth is just right. If the tilt were altered slightly, surface temperatures would be too hot, too extreme on Earth. If the atmospheric discharge or lightning rate were greater, there would be too much fire destruction. If it were less, there would be too little nitrogen fixing in the soil. Any horticulturists here? Lightning helps plants grow. If there were more seismic activity, much more life would be lost. If there was less seismic activity, nutrients on the ocean floors and the river runoff would not be cycled back to the continents through tectonic uplift. Yes, even earthquakes are necessary to sustain life as we know it. Everything inside this world that we are a part of has a purpose. And no one can say it's just by chance, right? Everything has a purpose. Proof for God. So if we have all this proof, how would an atheist respond? Astronomer Fred Hoyle says a common sense interpretation of these facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. I guess we can speak about Bigfoot. He's a blind hide and seek champ. So how do they respond? Well, they respond with this. Hi, Marvel fans. The multi-universe theory. Who can explain this without Doctor Strange?
But there must be that there's an infinite number of universes, and that this universe must exist because of that.
Say that again.
There are an infinite number of possible universes out there that
Right.
we don't see because we're in this universe.
Because we're in this one, right?
So
So
this
we're-
universe must exist mathematically because there are other universes out there.
You mean
So-
other ones must exist because this one exists, right?
and vice versa.
And vice versa, right? Okay. And we just happen to be lucky enough to be in the one right here that can sustain life. That's where Marvel misses it. Marvel says, oh, it's the exact same life structures, it's just we're all alligators in this one, or whatever, right? So infinite number of universes exist, right? Thank you, Brad, for that explanation. All right, so what are problems with the multi-universe theory? First and most significant, there is zero evidence for it, right? Zero. Nobody's ever seen it.
It makes the math fit.
It does, but nobody's ever observed it, and evidence that such universes may exist. What's the second problem with it? An infinite number of finite things, right? So it would be impossible to have an unlimited number of limited universes. This is a what? It's a self-defeating argument, right? In and of itself, it's a self-defeating argument. Third, other universes would need fine-tuning also. So even if there were multiple universes, multiple timelines, multiple whatever you want to say, right? Still doesn't mean that a divine designer did not have to be there to fine-tune everything in its path, right? Someone had to put that in motion, no matter what. Fourth, it's so broad that any event can be explained away by it, right? See, the terrorists didn't fly airplanes into the World Trade Center here. It was an accident. On another universe, it just didn't happen, right? So that's just, they happen to be in our universe, and that's just the way our universe happened to happen. Or maybe we can let Hitler off also, right? We can say Hitler just happened to be in this universe instead of in another universe, right? You see the problem with multi-universe? You can just explain away anything, but it doesn't really explain away anything, right? Extreme evidence calls for extreme theories to explain it away. So if there's a lot of evidence for something, we got to find something crazy to go after. So, all right, God, how are we supposed to know if you're there or not? So he says, look to the heavens, right? Psalms 19, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Isaiah 40:25 says, to whom then will you compare me that I should be like him, says the Holy One. That's verse 25. Verse 26, he actually answers that and says, lift your eyes on high and see who created these. Who was he who brings out their host by number, calling them all by name, by the greatness of his might, and because he is strong in power, not one of these is missing. Think about that for a minute. He knows every name of every star that's in this galaxy, and he put them there. And he knows by name, he put them there, and that proves his strength. Yes?
And the book of Job, it talks about, who is binded, Orion and the Pleiades.
Mm-hmm.
And those are actually two constellations that the stars are held together by gravity. Whereas all the other constellations we just look at, and it looks like they come in to play with each other, but they don't.
Interesting. They're bound by gravity, right? That's right here. Somewhere in this cluster, right? It just kind of points out Orion's spur here. These are not the actual points. It's just trying to show where they are in relation to our sun. That is a lot. A lot. Psalms 103:11 says, for as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his steadfast love toward those who fear him. We know, after the first class, that there's at least 30 trillion miles between our star, the sun, and the closest star to us, right? It's 400 billion kilometers, 30 million miles, whatever it is, right? But it states that's how much God loves us, between even the stars, right? Kind of blows the whole thing out of the water about I love you to the moon back, doesn't it? But it reiterates, though, I love you with the love of the Lord. If he loves us that much, that bigness, that thinking on that. The blind faith of an atheist reveals that the rejection of a designer is not a head problem. I'll say that again. The blind faith of an atheist reveals that the rejection of a designer is not a head problem. It's not as if we lack evidence or intellectual justification for a designer. On the contrary, the evidence is impressive. What we have here is a will problem. Some people, despite the evidence, simply don't want to admit there is a designer. So, when we're bombarded with all this science and all this stuff trying to disprove God, remember that it actually proves God. Scientists are the ones that are telling you it disproves God, right? We're hearing one side from one person. We're not actually listening to what God has done. They're trying to tell you, spin a story to you, right? So just remember that as you're listening to what the world has to say about everything. Okay? That's it. That's all I've got. We've got about 10 minutes. Anybody have any questions?
I want to throw this out there. So Dalen and I talked about some constants, anthropic constants, and he was using the parallel of Apollo 13, and he talked about the oxygen level and the atmospheric transparency, the moon and earth gravitational interaction, carbon dioxide, and gravity, right? So there is and he also then went through 10 more very quickly. Centrifugal force, universe expansion, velocity of light, water vapor, a bunch of that stuff, okay? So he gave you 15 of these constants. Now, there's this astrophysicist, he calculated the probability of these 15 constants, which are a fraction of a total of 122 constants. You know what I mean when I say constants? That means we have 21% oxygen. 25 is too much, 15 is too little. Okay. There's 122 scientific constants. And he calculated this incredible number for all of those to be true, and they happened by chance, that is, without a designer. Well, there's one chance, I don't know how you come up with this stuff. There's one chance in 10 to the 138th power. That's 138 zeros after a 1, whatever that number is. That's how minute the possibility is that all 122 of those constants could have happened by chance without a designer. And I found that to be a pretty amazing statistic that this guy threw out.
That's why science has to come up with things like infinite multiple universes.
Multiple universes. You remember last week we talked about, what was the phrase? About time. Imaginary time.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, Brian, you're right.
Let's put all this in perspective. We're told, looking there at that picture on the right, we're told somewhere in the middle of that bright spot there was an explosion. And from that explosion we got at least 100 billion stars. 100 billion stars over 30 trillion miles. I can't even comprehend that distance. That's crazy. So we're told to believe that it exploded and everything got put right where it needs to be so that this one little bitty rock called Earth could support human life. Now, I don't know, I often wonder, and you could debate all day, on the days of creation, did God say and it immediately happened, or did God say and it took the full day for everything to form? Who knows? But it's so clear to me, at least, that we were put where we need to be. Everything was put where it needed to be perfectly. For gravity to work perfectly, for the earth to be able to be where it needed to be in relation to the sun, in relation to having the moon, in relation to all the other planets that block so many of the massive meteorites and things like that come toward us. It was put exactly where it needed to be. If you've ever been around explosions or anything like that, other than fireworks, you know it's chaos. There's no explosion that puts things where it needs to be. It just doesn't happen. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't matter how many times you blow it up, it's still chaos. This is not chaos. This is perfect order. And it's really clear.
Any Big Bang Theory fan, Big Bang, the TV show fans in here, they talk about the Hadron Collider. If anybody knows about this, it's like so many stories underground in Norway, I believe. And it's all these electromagnetic ways to speed atoms up and collide them together. Okay? Do you know a lot about that, Cody?
We've seen the show,
Seen the show,
a lot
yes.
of times, but that's about it.
We've seen the show a lot of times. But anyway, it's kind of neat. The collider is able to take two atoms, speed them up using the same way you move an electric car or a fan. And it speeds them up so fast that whenever they slam together, they've actually created what they call little galaxies, right? I'm going to say little because, first off, the beginning there was nothing, and then it happened. These people are speeding up what God already created and smashing them together, right? They're smashing God's atoms that He created at a really, really fast rate. So if they think they're going to create a galaxy, it's kind of wild that they can even believe that, number one. But number two, who wants to blow this up in your bathtub, right? Like, I don't care how big Norway is, but if this blows up there, we're all goners. But just remember, anybody like we're talking about is trying to play God. We're trying to do things that we're trying to, what He does. We shouldn't even mess with it. But to be able to combat atheists, you got to remind them that someone put all this stuff in order, like Andrew was saying tonight. So, other than that, that's all we got.
Next week we'll talk about the design of life, what that looks like. Atheist evolution, they have no idea. They have no actual explanation of what caused life, what is life. How can we've been trying to create life forever with all our technology. All our computers trying to create life from non-living things. It just can't happen.
We're just one monkey away.
Here's a good passage to go on. Paul wrote this in Romans 1, verse 20. I just wonder what scientists would do with this. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible attributes, His eternal power, and His divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. God's power is on display when we look around us at what has been created. And for those that don't believe it, they have no excuse.
All right, thank you for being here.